Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to CCIA and Metrc's webinar. We're truly excited to bring this opportunity for a dynamic and authentic conversation with California's seed-to-sale software tracking provider. Since the inception of our regulated cannabis program here in the state in 2017, we have been in partnership with Metrc. It is remarkable to reflect on how far we've come as an industry during this time. Notwithstanding the inevitable challenges and hurdles that we've encountered along the way. It's been a long few years, right? In these very moments of adversity and our pain points and our setbacks, that's when we discover the valuable lessons and opportunities for growth. In the spirit of continuous improvement, we've come together today to engage in a solutions-driven discussion. Our objective is clear. We invite and encourage all of our members to share their constructive questions in the Q&A, as Eddie said, and Eddie and I will weave these into our conversation. And let's remember that while we cannot change the past, we can certainly collectively invest in a brighter future. It is with this spirit in mind that I'd like to kick off our inaugural session, the first of many we hope to have, and extend a warm welcome to Michael, Metrc's CEO. We're eager to hear from Michael as he introduces himself and his team and shares his vision for this next phase of Metrc. Together, we can foster mutual learning and ensure that Metrc remains adaptive and understanding of the needs of California operators when it comes to our track and trace provider. Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And I can't thank you and your membership for allowing our team to spend some time with you. My name is Michael Johnson, CEO of Metrc. I've been in this role for a little bit more than a year now. I'm joined by Sam Peterson, who's our CTO. I'm joined by James Daly, who leads our products team, and Chris Cox, who is our boots on the ground, leads our efforts right there with you in California. Each of us in our roles have only been in our roles for about a year, give or take. So this is a very new Metrc. We are, I think, making some meaningful strides in terms of turning the corner to try and demonstrate a stronger commitment to you, a stronger commitment to the industry, and really, hopefully, a better solution for folks. What I would say is the new Metrc is not particularly comparable to the old Metrc, whereas something that I think we highlight the most is how do we define customer? And the way Metrc was built for over a decade, the customer was defined as entirely the regulatory body, without really much focus or emphasis on partnering and creating the best outcomes for folks that are using the system, folks that are in other forms of law enforcement, third-party integrators, so on and so forth. And so over the past year, this team, which is, as I said, very new to Metrc, has been focusing on redefining what customer means to ensure that we are viewing you, and our relationship is that where you have the very best experience as a customer of Metrc, your folks that work in your facilities have the same experience, the integrators that you work with, that many of you rely on in your day-in business operations, we hold them to the exact same standard. And while I'm sure there'll be, and just reading through some of the questions that came in, there's certainly going to be some frustrations that folks have had with Metrc, over the last however many years you've used Metrc, and I sincerely apologize for that. I can't fix it, unfortunately. What I can do is I can demonstrate our commitment to the new Metrc, and hopefully work forward in resolving some of those challenges, finding out what the critical pain points for you are, finding out what the critical opportunities to add value are for you, such that you have the very best experience. And so myself, joined by my team that is much more skilled at being able to speak about the technology than I am, hopefully can provide meaningful insights from you and get really meaningful feedback that we can incorporate into the product and our service offerings.
Perfect. Well, Michael, with that spirit in mind, I think what's nice is to level set for everybody what Metrc is. And by that, I mean specifically what the role Metrc plays in California and our track and trace system. Sometimes it is a wily question that not everybody knows. So I'd like to start us off from a solid foundation and from your and your team's perspective on Metrc's role in our ecosystem.
Absolutely. So track and trace is not just special to cannabis, although if you haven't encountered it in other parts of your life, you may think it is just special to cannabis. Most regulated industries have track and trace in some way, shape, or form. the thought frequently is that track and trace is supposed to keep people from coloring outside the lines or keep people from breaking rules. That is absolutely the opposite of what folks are doing. We don't force compliance in situations. And that's a specific and intentional choice. That's not only a choice for the business, but it's certainly a requirement for our state partners. Now, does that mean that there are certain guardrails that we can put in to avoid, errors that are really just mistakes, like and are always mistakes? Like, for example, you'll never harvest negative plants. It's really impossible. But Metrc allow you to do that, and that's because the tool for you is reporting your information and providing that information in a system and in a way that's able to be accessed and able to work through the supply chain between your business and, let's say you're a grower and you're selling to a distributor, and the distributor is then selling to a processor selling back to a distributor. Like, being able to push everything through the process within the system with visibility is the point of the system. Ultimately, you want to be able to catch things along the way that primarily affect public health. So there are ways, certainly, and there's different opportunities, and there's different ways of looking at the data, and there's different ways that we will present things on the state side that will certainly help them to flag anomalies, inversion, diversion. We also provide a number of tools from a business intelligence and analytical perspective, but that's all kind of bolted on top of the data. The data is really yours, and you're putting in data that is reflective of the reality of whatever it is you're doing in your particular process, whether it's a grower, process, or whatever. So we are not the state. We don't determine if something's legal or not. I'm never doing an investigation, as we don't have the authority to do that. We make software. We make software that you can put information into. Now, the reality is that the vast majority of folks, and I can't speak to the folks on this call, but the vast majority of licensees in California do not use a third-party integrator. So over 70%. Which, when you think about the fact that most every dispensary does use a third-party integrator to run their point-of-sale system, that's a pretty big number for folks that are in other parts, cultivation, distribution, processing, and the like. And so the reality is many folks use Metrc as an ERP solution, but it's not an ERP solution. And so as we continue to develop features and functionality in Metrc, we can just keep saying, like, hey, yep, you're annoyed by Metrc because it doesn't do what you want it to do, even though it's not designed to do that. Or we can try and build our features and functionality to meet you where you're at. And for a number of folks, meeting you where you're at specifically means identifying the gaps that you see and the inability to make meaningful sense of the data that you have, that's your data, that really is allowable to you in a standard format, which many industries do not have. So it probably doesn't feel like a luxury to you, but it really is. To be able to generate meaningful insights and make stronger decisions for your business, such that your business can be more successful. Our goal is frictionless compliance, and that's where the system is heading towards. I expect for every single item you identify within the system that it's a source of frustration. I fully intend for there to be an equal or at least a more powerful opportunity to add value to your day in, day out activities. The goal is not to bog you down in compliance bureaucracy. The goal is to find a way to make this as smooth as possible so that you can spend the majority of your time trying to grow your business.
So, no, that's curious, and that actually makes me kind of think of a sub question coming out of that, Michael. So you're kind of sounds like in the trifecta, so to speak, of the industry, the state, and then the Metrc, the software provider. You're the provider for what the regulators are asking to do on track and trace. You're not necessarily mandating or creating those track and trace requirements. That makes me, I get, and then that leads to another question, which is, if you're contracted software provider, then are there features in Metrc? I'm thinking of that 70%. I think you mentioned that are just using Metrc directly. Are there features in Metrc that aren't necessarily tailor-made for California, features that maybe are in there because of another state, or things that are a little more general use?
Well, yes, in a sense, yes, because it's a single source code and it's applied, or it's deployed in a number of other states. That being said, it is exceptionally configurable, and software is just generally not like this. In government software in particular, a big reason why government software can be very challenging is because a lot of the software is built bespoke, specific to that state. And so what we've been able to do, and I think what has been kind of a challenge that Sam and James have encountered in joining Metrc, is that in most software companies, you build one feature one time and it can be deployed infinitely. when we build a feature one time, but it needs to be deployed either in a very specific way 23 different times, or it needs to be, it needs to kind of have a different look and feel 23 different times. So there are a number of things that are inside of Metrc that you will certainly see in other states, in particular, the look and feel and the overall flow. There's some very specific things that are in place because the statute and regulations in California require it. Those change a lot. The way Metrc can be structured changes a lot. So we do have some flexibility. That's one of the things that Chris has worked with the DCC on, will continue to work with the DCC on, about functionality that exists in Metrc that may be deployed in another state that could add a lot of value to what's happening in California. But sometimes things are just different in California. Like, for example, we had a lot of, I think a lot of angst for everyone really in April 1st for the deployment of the delivery functionality and delivery rules that were issued, I believe, just at the beginning of the year. And so not a quick turnaround for folks. And for third-party integrators in particular, the way deliveries works in California is materially different than it works in any other state. And so from that situation, like, it's going to be, that part's going to be very unique to California.
Michael, I really appreciate that clarification on what Metrc does and your interface with the department. So there are certain things that are tailor-made to California. There's also sometimes features that exist in the Metrc platform that sometimes are a misconception or difficult for operators because they see it, they can use it, but it's actually non-compliant for our jurisdiction. Could you kind of explain to us the reasoning that is? Do you control what features are there? Is it something that the department would particularly need to say those shouldn't be there? How can we better work on it? Because if we can remove like superfluous or potential pitfalls, let's say, because you shouldn't be able to use something, that is something that as operators want to learn how to use the system, or they have new employees, can become kind of a tricky situation.
Yeah, so what you're describing is really in line with the evolution of when I described the new Metrc, where we're heading. So in kind of the past, present, future sort of story, in the past, it was exclusively anything we update is dictated by the state. And that's not special to California, that's everywhere. And it's been like that for a decade. In the present world, there's a bunch of that stuff because states have a lot of requests and the wish lists can get pretty big and couldn't possibly keep up with all of them. We're trying to get through all of those. The goal is most of what we describe as legacy enhanced service requests should be completed by the end of this year, most, not all, most. And there'll still be some that kind of make sense. What we've been able to kind of we're kind of winding down and catching up or reimagining what some of these requests look like, while at the same time we're picking up on what we see in terms of operational challenges that folks have. And so like a good example is when folks call support. If you're calling support for a significant, like a portion of the system, and they tend to be the same kind of support calls and same kind of frustrations and same kind of licensees, like every couple months have the same issue, well, there's probably something not right in the system. Either it's not intuitive, or it's, maybe there's a bug that we just didn't isolate. And so really analyzing on a proactive basis where folks are having challenges with the business. And then secondarily, with folks like Chris and other folks that we brought into Metrc across the country, being able to have a much more connectedness with licensees in what they're actually doing. And so folks say inevitably, like, oh my gosh, I have to hire a whole person to manage Metrc. Well, what does that mean exactly? Like, do you have to have a whole person manage Metrc, or do you have to whole person manage your inventory? And it depends on who you talk to, how that question goes. But that's not great. That's not the goal. The goal is to have folks to make things pretty seamless. And so if you're saying I have to have a whole person manage Metrc, well, what's taking you so long? Or what's taking so long? Why is it so hard? Like a very good example that's specific to California is CSV uploads. And not everybody uses the CSV upload, but if you're a larger operator, you're going to use it a lot more frequently. And a lot of times you'll use CSV upload because you use a third-party integrator that doesn't necessarily have the best functionality in there, and it's just easier for you to get the data directly into Metrc instead of some other data being passed from a third-party system. Well, CSV uploads sometimes are thousands and thousands and thousands of rows, and they process slower in the system. And so we worked on developing functionality to make it so that it can sort of process in the background and you get a reminder, but it's not disrupting your day. You're not stopped. Like Metrc's not stopped for you. You can keep working. Now it's processing the background. Sounds very small, and frankly, it is kind of small, but it enables a lot. It enables folks that literally are spending all day working on Metrc to find hours in their day to do other things.
I think that the term frictionless compliance is really resonating. One of our members just brought it up, and they were wondering, and I think this is a good question to play off of what you were just saying, in this growing list of issues that Metrc is working from, how can users either review, engage, add to those concerns so that we're in a dynamic, deliberative dialogue with Metrc? What is the opportunity that's there for us to direct engage?
Yes, so there's a couple different things. On August 14th, we launched a new support platform, which is built on Salesforce. It enables folks to interact much, I think, in a much more robust way with our support folks when they have issues. And so that enables you to pass in support calls, same way you've done before, calling on the phone, but also through live chat, through logging into a portal. And there's more and more features that will continue to roll out with that. We just haven't, it's generally best practice to kind of make sure everything's working, and then, add in a couple more features and add a couple more features. Like our phone system before long will allow you to actually just schedule a callback instead of sitting on hold. And so having a better feedback loop in that sense, I think, allows for folks to be able to share what's going on with their issues, but also have indication into what happened. So this is an issue because there's a bug in the system. Like we need to get to a place, which we're not currently, but we need to get to a place where that bug's been resolved, and we actually tell you. We also launched concurrent with that new system, a closed loop feedback survey process. And so some of the folks, some of your constituency and membership may have received some. Every month, we're surveying folks across the country, but kind of breaking them apart. So like everybody in California isn't picked in January. So we're kind of spreading them out over the course of the year to be able to get meaningful feedback on how we can improve. And we're proactively, and myself, Sam, others are proactively reaching out to folks that have either ideas that we want to learn more about, or have had bad experiences that need to be resolved. And I think that's important. For the third thing is, I mentioned that Chris Cox is boots on the ground in California. We've got some other folks that are based in California. We intend to be very active. Our what we call customer service management, or customer success management team, is intended to be active, boots on the ground, to be able to work with you. If you have problems, if you're having a meeting among your members and you're like, hey, we'd like to have somebody there that can answer Metrc questions, or gather Metrc feedback. That's the point. Just with you, Pamela, and Eddie, and I met with Eddie a handful of months back now. Just trying to be active. Our involvement, which I'm sure you can attest, is not really been significant in terms of seeking you out at the CCIA and getting feedback, or any other association, getting feedback on what we can do. So this is a handful of examples as to how we're systematizing and adding process to how we can get this information. But I'll put my information, my email address, phone number. You can call me anytime. No one ever does. I do this a lot. People think it's crazy.
So Michael, that's actually a great segue to a question we had coming out of our survey. You get all this feedback, let's even say we've cleared the lines of communication. We've got some great feedback going between CCIA members. You're getting top line issues from industry throughout the state. How do y'all prioritize changes? So how do y'all prioritize, okay, this needs to be a 1 month fix, 3 month fix? Just to bring up a specific example, bring up this week, we saw the feature come out for the trade sample designation, specific trade sample designation. Super stoked to see it. It was something that was passed a while ago. So just curious how priorities are lined up, notwithstanding statute, of course.
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways to think about priorities. So I'll defer to Sam or James on how we work with the product, because kind of coordinating the roadmap, while I love to say that California is, actually, I don't know that I would love to say California is our only state, but certainly most important state. And
careful what you wish for.
We have others, so we have to kind of manage that. And of course, there's different types of priorities when things change in statute or change in regulation. But then we have other parts of Metrc aren't just using the system. They could be specific, as I mentioned, just working closer with support, having better training, a better curriculum. And so those are organizational changes. And so to prioritize those, that's a slightly different process. My hunch is the majority of your questions have to do with the product. So I'll turn it over to Sam Peterson and I guess James made it together to explain kind of how we think about the product roadmap and making those types of decisions.
Yeah, I'll hop in here, and then James, you can add any color you have there. Definitely the one thing, I've been here 11 months now, and brought in James Daly to head up product. One of the biggest things we've been trying to do is just do a better job partnering with the states. And by that I mean, we have a large number of states, as Michael said. We'd prefer just to have California, but that's not the case. So as requests come in from California, the biggest thing we've changed is we actually flush out those requirements of California. And we've really tried to be in a spot where we partner more with the state on things we see or issues we think this might not be the best way to solve it. At the end of the day, the state is still the rule maker and ultimately going to make the decision. But I feel like that's a lot of where Chris Cox has done a fabulous job working with the state of California, so that we're flushing out not only the business requirements, but how are we going to solve it technically. And we really are trying now to start giving adequate time to licensees as well as TPIs. Why only 30% of you are using a TPI, not giving them adequate time to adjust and integrate is a problem. And then we meet regularly with California. We go through their backlog, we go through the other state backlog, and really work through those requests. The next one, so that's I think more the state driven. We want to change this, we want to do that. So big things like deliveries, that's how that came through, and we're doing better, as you'll see more coming out from the state. The other is we get in requests, and we actually have a weekly meeting about what we're seeing as far as bugs and issues that we're making sure internally we're prioritizing those. We're prioritizing what are the highest things in California and what do we need to fix, as well as, to Michael's point, tickets coming in from Salesforce, user exchanges, meetings like this. James and I, we powwow on these things and, look at where are those fixes and nuggets that we're finding. We visited 4 states in the last 2 months, which was really insightful. And so very much, we view this as how do we sit with Chris now and, suggest things to the state of, hey, we want to fix this. We would love to just listen to licensees and be like, yeah, this doesn't make sense from a UX perspective, but we do have to go back and partner with the state to prioritize those things. And I'd say, luckily for this group, it is working the best with California. And a lot of that is just thanks to Chris Cox and his relationship with the DCC.
So Sam, I think one thing I want to add, because you pretty much covered it all, but one of the things that's been really helpful for us to be more responsive to requests, whether they come through support channels or they come directly from the DCC, is the investment that we've made in our technology team. So since Sam joined and I joined in February, I think we've tripled the size of our technology team, and we've changed our internal processes so we can deliver more faster and at a better quality. So in addition to working closely with Chris and the DCC, setting priorities of what we should work on, we can now turn things around a lot faster, be a lot more responsive, and we're getting more done. So now that we've kind of got those processes in place, things are running well, we really want to start reaching out and getting more user feedback and hearing more from the industry on how we can make the product better.
Great. Well, I really appreciate that insight. I'm sure our members do. We did have a question come in, and CCIA, as you should know, has an enforcement priority, right? We want to see good operators get the benefit of being good operators and address the challenges of bad actors. And therefore, I'd like to ask how the DCC might use Metrc and its auditing tools to improve enforcement. For example, we have issues here you may have heard of. If not, I can clarify it for you. Burner distro licenses or burner distros and other sort of non-compliant features, diversion. How have other states utilized audit features? How could the DCC utilize Metrc in more of an enforcement tool to help us aid in our objective of increasing enforcement?
A lot of states, I mean, as I said, Metrc. So there's, I'm sure people have seen some of the news and whatnot about some challenges with some accusations, I guess, related to burner licenses. And I genuinely can't provide context on that. I mean, it's probably not a good idea either, regardless of the legal situation. But I genuinely can't provide context on it because that's not what we do. Like we collect the data lives in Metrc. There's a lot of reasons why you could have packages that sit in a particular location for a long time. I'm sure I'd be shocked if there's not, some folks that are coloring outside the lines in some of those scenarios. But we don't have the ability to investigate. We're not going and like knocking on doors and saying, "Hey, let me see what's in your storeroom." That's a DCC thing. To my knowledge, the DCC leveraged the data, I think, pretty well to make sure that they are kind of putting their pieces together to try and grow enforcement. But I think it's really important for folks to note, to my knowledge, the DCC has a number of open positions. I don't think they've ever been fully staffed in terms of what they would need in terms of being able to carry out the level and the number of inspections that would be required. I know that there's a number of different strategies that they've tried to employ or attempting to employ, but I really can't speak for them on that. What I can say is that we are continuing to develop tools to make it easier, clearer, and more direct for the states to be able to see, and for the DCC in particular, to be able to see things that they would describe as anomalous behavior or relationships that might not make sense. Now, the hard part, I think, is trying to figure out and wade through the data to understand, did somebody just make a mistake, or is something truly, peculiar going on? And so what we're trying to do, and we're continuing to do with the state, is to understand where these critical areas are, to build visualizations and develop insight using a platform called Tableau, to be able to make it very, very clear and hopefully enable them to be more successful in achieving the overall goals of trying to create the safest and most compliant market.
Could you provide a little bit extra detail on the Tableau feature? And I appreciate the limitations on Metrc. I think it's more, are there opportunities and are other states able to be triggered or alerted by the Metrc data that they're getting? Because to your point, if the DCC isn't fully staffed, are there ways that the compliance software tool can alert them to, hey, this is something you may want to look into more deeply? Because I understand the limitations, and you're not our enforcement division, but it is a tool that could assist the department when they're not fully staffed.
Absolutely, and it has. I mean, since the inception of Metrc, there's been I don't know the number offhand, but there's full-time people that query data and pull data out of Metrc and put it in different like shapes and forms and develop insights from it. That process just requires people to actually do it. That's really the predominant process in most states. What we're trying to do is work with them such that things do get brought to their attention based on how the DCC wants to look at and analyze and see different things. Like, so obviously there's basic stuff that we can do, we've done for a long time. Like, you shouldn't have negative harvests, right? But negative harvests are probably, at least from what we hear anecdotally, we've done like a data analysis on it. That's usually somebody making a mistake, not somebody trying to do something inappropriate. And so trying to navigate that, I think, is challenging for them. And so we'll continue to produce more relationship analysis, better identification, anything that they think they come across something that is, hey, this scenario happens, and making sure that we're building in alerts within Tableau, functionality that will present that and produce that so that they can make the most of the teams that they've got. But to be clear, because I think this has come up a bunch of times in California, they've always had that ability. Whether or not they've used the ability in the way that your membership would like, I can't speak to that. But the abilities existed. I personally think it's probably not I think it could have been better. I think there's lots of parts of Metrc that could have been better. And so we're going down that path to make it better and to make it as easy as possible for them to support you as a regulatory partner.
I appreciate that clarity. And, we're, as Eddie said at the beginning, this is a three-way conversation, right? We'll take the information we know from Metrc and the tools that you're providing, and then have a similar conversation with the department. I'm going to kick it over to Eddie because I know we've got a lot of questions in the queue, and we can shift to more functional questions.
This Q&A is popping off, and keep it coming, friends. This is exactly what we're here. We're truly, we want to be just a conduit for conversation, friends. So keep the conversation going. Michael, y'all, I was trying to think of like a cool segue into some of these, but I'm just going to jump into it. Let's jump into some other questions that we're seeing. A theme that I'm seeing come through with a few questions is responsiveness, or lack thereof in some cases. Some folks are mentioning a specific thing that's come up. It looks a few times in the box is a specific thing around the lack of a ticket or a item going through with the initial question. So folks will ask a question and get a response, but without the initial question being attached to it. So there's sort of a loss of communication. But generally speaking, there does just seem to be some questions and concerns around, lack of response or sort of robotic sort of things. So I guess as we're going into the new Metrc, the new era, breaking down some walls, what are some improvements we're seeing in communication and, I guess, for lack of a better term, the human touch?
Yeah, so I see the questions that have come through the chat here, like Whitney, for example. It seems like a bot asking the same questions. It's because it actually matters. However, I take support calls, and I will not be taking them today, but been trying to take them on Fridays. That's the core day, and these things really do happen. It's software, it's complex. It's not just special to Metrc. I'm sure everybody uses different tools that, for whatever reason, it just opens right up in Firefox. It doesn't work in Chrome. I actually personally had this issue yesterday with something not in Metrc, just normal websites. And Sam actually was like counseling me not to just accept all these certificates that I was getting to, I get into the website. So sometimes these things will happen. That being said, I understand it's kind of annoying. Every time you call, you're like, yes, I use Chrome. Yes, I use this. Yes, I use that. I mean, I get that. And so how do we make it to where those types of questions just aren't necessary? So the old support function, it would take sometimes over 5 minutes just to be able to get to your question, because we're manually collecting all of this information where it's, tell me your license number. It's not a short license number, and you have to really enunciate because M sounds like N and the like. And then we're asking these questions. These are all different types of questions, like, do you use Chrome? Do you always use Chrome? There's a field that we could identify this in the support system, because our new support system has that functionality. So I would venture to guess with some of these comments, they're pre-August 14th. But if they're not, definitely you can reach out to me directly or ask the question again, or whatever works best for you. I would definitely be interested to see if you're still experiencing these types of things post August 14th with the new system. And then we'll dig into it. I'm happy to get a response to you, because the empathetic type of a partnership is what we're looking for, specifically as it relates to support, not a situation that feels robotic and mechanical and that we're just kind of checking a box for you. I understand if you're calling support, you're already frustrated. And so it's incumbent upon us to make sure we're giving you the very best experience, because you're certainly already at a frustrated spot. We don't want to frustrate you more.
Thanks, Michael. Moving into a few others that we're seeing. This is actually a question that is asked here, and we had laid out as some coming from our survey earlier. And I'll actually just read out what the attendee put. Mr. Johnson noted earlier, there's a software tool, and therefore negative harvest can be entered. So can you help us understand a little bit more around why Metrc allows California users to enter quote unquote non-compliant information or activity in Metrc? There's a line that, we've heard from, I can say anecdotally, we've heard from an inspectors, just because Metrc allows you to do it doesn't mean you should. Can you help demystify a little bit more? And is that something that can maybe be addressed in future improvements?
Yeah, and so it's a little bit of a weird thing, because folks generally look at Metrc as this tool for compliance. It is a tool to facilitate the process and data collected to evaluate compliance. Metrc itself, we're not a governing body of any kind, so we're not going to be able to make an opinion on whether somebody's compliant or not. We're merely collecting the data. As I mentioned earlier, having the ability for folks to have negative plan counts probably doesn't make sense, in my opinion. But these are also decisions that we don't generally make. And so that doesn't mean that the DCC has said, like in plain English, like we want negative counts. Like it's more of like we need to allow people to run their business, and sometimes the way they use the system, because the way their business runs might be different than the way others run. So I do think it's a bit of a fine line in terms of allowing too much to happen in Metrc versus forcing people to essentially answer or import or put data in fields a certain way, because that's the only way that Metrc accepts it, because that's the only compliant thing to do. If somebody's like not doing something the right way, they might not know it, but we shouldn't be putting them in a position where they feel like they have to lie just to get the data into Metrc. It's a very slippery slope. This is not the first time I've had this conversation, won't be the last. It is definitely something we're going to continue to work on. We're not trying to make it harder to use, but at the same time, if you put too much control over it, too much restrictions on it, that's the other angle of frustration. So now it's like, hey, Metrc, I make all these mistakes in Metrc because it doesn't tell me that I can't do something or I shouldn't do something. So let's say we correct that and we overcorrect, because inevitably, you have to kind of find that sweet spot. So overcorrecting the other side is like, well, I can't even run my business because Metrc doesn't have functionality that allows me as this unique processor to run through my process flows, because I'm not like anybody else. Metrc is too restrictive. So it's a spectrum, and we need to find the best place in the spectrum. Historically, definitely erred in the direction has been on the wide open part of the spectrum, but we are actively having conversations about how to structure that differently.
I'll just add quickly.
Oh, go, Chris.
Sorry, Pamela. I'll just add quickly that the ultimate goal is for the data in the system to reflect what's happening in the real world, whether those circumstances are compliant or not, because those non-compliant circumstances are an educational opportunity for the DCC to let you guys know, hey, this particular piece here is in conflict with the regulations or with statute, and we need you to take a look at that and address it.
Perfect. I think that brings up two interesting points, right? I think sometimes words matter. So the Metrc stands for Marijuana Enforcement Tracking and Reporting Compliance. So I think sometimes that denotes to our operators that Metrc is a compliance tool. So how that compliance comes in to that system, I think is going to be a useful demystification or clarification for the members. And I appreciate that sometimes data can't be inputted correctly. Human error to error is human, to be human is to error. And one of the questions in our chat is specifically, is there a back function? Is there a way that, since we know human error occurs, is that something that Metrc is looking at? So clarifying the role of compliance within the software, and then kind of elevating the opportunities to address human error head on.
That's what we want to avoid, right? So we want to make it easier to avoid human error. Like I'm not trying to create more frustration with Metrc, but we also, part of that is also just a more intuitive interface, and that's certainly something that we look towards, and we look at opportunities when we do get a lot of feedback on, Metrc training needs to be improved, or, support needs to be improved. This is really it's not one thing, it's all the things, right? There's lots of software tools that I'm sure many of you have never read the instruction manual at all, for most of us. And those systems are just more intuitive. By nature, what we're doing is a little bit more complex than figuring out how Instagram works. So the instruction manual and training are important, but we also have an opportunity to work even more on improving the usability and functionality with the system, which is something we're paying close attention to.
So, and if you can't answer directly, it's okay. But back button coming? Are people edit features coming?
Chris, like there's some issue, like some challenges.
It's all good if not. I just want to make sure we're.
Yeah, no, I think. Yeah, and I'll ask Sam to help me out here if I mischaracterize anything, but really there are a few areas in the system that do allow kind of like an undo function, but those are very specific and intentionally targeted. The system is built on recording literally millions of events per day that occur within the supply chain. And, to go back and to be able to correct data errors that, potentially impact millions of subsequent events there's technical challenges there, as well as it's not really feasible from kind of a chain of custody and just overall data perspective. So that's kind of the short layperson explanation of that.
No, that makes sense. And to bring it down to even, because I'm very tech illiterate, what you're saying is an edit to one order could have ripple effects across many different others and domino effect across that. I'll say,
Yeah, absolutely.
Not understanding binary or tech, that seems to be a a restriction. Segue. Oh, Pamela, please.
I want to ask one question because Michael, you said something important. Not everybody always reads an instruction manual. Is there opportunities for what resources or opportunities for licensees to really learn the system, to invest in their compliance officers' understanding of the Metrc software? Because sometimes it's less about reading what's on the page and more about being able to interact with training specific to certain functions. So since you mentioned it, I wanted to tease it out and see if we could get anything for our members.
Yeah, so we did launch a new training platform about 18 months ago called Metrc Learn, which has interactive training where it's sort of like video based, but then you're actually able to click and enter information and see how it works. So you're practicing it within each individual module. There's a lot of modules. However, in my opinion, I don't know that it's as intuitive and easy to use. And so we've had a lot of conversations lately about how we can make improvements to the way that, or the content within that we're providing, the way we're deploying it, because, not everybody's gonna want to sit and watch a video. Sometimes people want like a big cheat sheet. Some people are gonna want a tooltip inside the system. Like how do we expand and diversify our opportunities to provide these kind of bite-sized nuggets? Most people that are using Metrc that get hung up on something don't need to go through kind of start to finish how Metrc works. They need to solve like one specific thing. And so even things that probably should have been there a while ago, like a contextual help function within the system, are areas that we think are hugely beneficial. And James is actually spending a lot of time quarterbacking that transformation for us.
James, do you think we could get some interactive training videos going on? Like sometimes it's really helpful to see the process versus reading it.
So I'm actually addressing this in a couple of different ways.
Awesome.
To support users and reinforce training. I think the first way is we want to get our support into the application. So while you're actually doing something in the application and you're stuck, you're not sure what your next step should be, you should be able to get help, ask a question, look up some steps right there where you are in the application at that moment. So right now we're evaluating different types of knowledge-based AI tools where you could actually ask a question like, hey, how do I register the waste on a plant trim? And it would actually come back, analyze your question that you made in plain English and come back and tell you how to do that and show you inside the application how you can do that. That's a great reinforcement for training because you might have seen the video, but now you don't recall it. And now you don't even have to leave the application or find that video again. You actually get that information on the spot when you need it. So that's something I'm evaluating right now with the rest of the team. And as soon as we find the right partner, hopefully that's a feature we can bring out to the licensees pretty quick. And then we're also going back, and I think our move to Metrc Learn was light years ahead of where we were, but I think there's a lot of opportunity to improve that content, improve those interactions. And we're going to start revisiting those lessons and looking for how we can improve those. We're also looking at how do we want to focus our training? And I think something that's valuable is start looking at our training from the perspective of the users. So if you have a cultivation and there are a lot of different roles inside of a cultivation. So maybe our training should be focused on what an individual's role is within their organization, and they can start there, learn how to use Metrc and learn their role, and obviously offer them the opportunity to continue to learn and learn other roles. but really focus their initial training around what is their job and what are they going to be doing at that particular facility. So we're revisiting our content. We have a focus on improving the quality of the content, as well as a focus on what the individual needs to learn to do their job.
This is a great, while we're on this topic, I think this actually leads to a couple questions that came into the Q&A, and one that specifically I can resonate with as a compliance officer myself at a company. Metrc, and so I'll read a question that came in from Amber Morris from NorCal Cannabis. Metrc announcements for new functionalities, etc., are distributed to those who are only distributed to those who are actually working in the system. So those who actually have, direct Metrc user accounts. It would be great if there's some sort of opportunity for non-system users like compliance officers, CTOs, etc., to receive these sort of announcements as well. And again, I can throw my hat in the ring as being that would be helpful. Is there some sort of listserv or something that folks can sign up for to be able to get those bulletins in a wider response? Another question that came in said is, does Metrc have a newsletter or some sort of direct contact for current updates?
Okay, I'll take it. I think what we're encouraging folks is just licensees is to set up their Salesforce account. So if you set up your account in Salesforce, we have your email, we have your contact information, we have your licensee number, and then if we're going to use that as our database for putting this type of information out, whether it's in the form of a bulletin or a newsletter or some other channel. Really signing up with Salesforce gets you in the queue. And as we message out, that's the first group we're going to make sure we target. So create your Salesforce support account and you'll be in the loop.
Thanks, James. And is there, folks can reach out to like the help email handle if they have more questions around how to integrate on that?
They can go to the support page on metrc.com, and that will take them, that has a link that goes directly to the front door of Salesforce, and they can register there.
Thank you. Kind of along similar lines, and a sub question coming out of that, in the spirit of improved communication with licensees and getting some direct feedback on how things are going, Metrc is starting to make field visits from licensees to just specifically collect feedback for improvement. Michael, you mentioned that earlier. You've seen some on the ground things with folks in California. How does Metrc determine who you're going to engage with as sort of a field trip or a case study? And how can folks who are interested in being an example there get in touch with you all to potentially do that?
I can take this one. First off, you can always reach out to me anytime. I will engage with you and see how we can coordinate a visit or a discussion or whatever is appropriate for you. I think in the past year or so, the DCC has also had a renewed focus on being on location with licensees. And that's not just for compliance inspections, but also taking a step back to kind of the what they call the track and trace administrator team, who works with the data, who partners with us to resolve system issues and work on system enhancements and things like that. So we've kind of been following the DCC's lead in visiting and kind of working together to identify facilities to visit in the past year. And we always have an opportunity to influence that with the DCC. So I will type my contact information into the chat. Please reach out to me directly, and I'd be happy to work on that with you.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. As we've got a few minutes left, and folks, if you have any more last minute burning questions, again, make sure to throw them in the Q&A. We're here till 11:30. But a closing out kind of this theme of, engagement, communication, has there been successful models in, so I guess I should actually preface, and Michael, I appreciate you brought it up earlier. We've tried a few times as CCIA and Metrc as us together to, build communication. I'm really excited we're doing this. Hope it's the first of many. Have there been successful models in other states that you all have been able to engage with for, cooperation between industry, track and trace, and then the regulators that maybe we can learn from here in California, stakeholder groups, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think every state, I mean, I'm certainly not gonna say anything negative about any of our states. But I can tell you that there's definitely, each state has certain things that they do, I think, pretty well. I think you have challenges with some of the states around you with, you know, kind of supporting the illicit market in a way that's not doing enough to oppose the illicit market, and certainly that's a challenge. And some of those are metric states, some of those are not metric states. And so you're going to find that folks are going to enforce and investigate and inspect in very different ways. I will say that some barometers that I look at, which is some of this data is publicly available, some of it's not, is what your wholesale pricing looks like in different states, and that's on like per pound or per liter of concentrate. And then also like kind of I analyze sort of a basket of goods, so to speak. So like how much is a typical pre-roll in Colorado versus California versus Oklahoma. And so California is probably not terribly surprising. Like your wholesale values typically are a little bit lower than some other states, but there's a lot of states that are lower than California. But you do have some states that I think have been around for a really long time that have done a lot to make sure that they were focused hard on rooting out the illicit market. And you see like Nevada is a good example. Colorado is a really, really good example. I would argue that Michigan's an excellent example. And so you see like really specific and intentional efforts on trying to protect the growers and protect the licensees in a way that their costs or their revenue opportunities aren't sort of degraded by trying to compete as much with the illicit market. And that's what I would say in terms of how folks, I think, are using it. It's a bit of a prickly question, so hopefully it doesn't feel like a non-answer. I'm genuinely trying to answer it in the most appropriate way.
No, sure. Makes sense, and you know we're building the ship as it goes, and in cannabis generally, in California and everywhere. So, any ways we can continue to improve communication, let's do it. And you know, I may to ask a follow-up question, and Chris, I'll just bring it out because it's something you brought up before. I think I saw something too around something Metrc user exchanges or something that's starting to come up. Is that something California that California operators might be able to engage in?
Yeah, we're working with the. Sorry, go ahead, Michael.
Go ahead, Chris.
Okay. Yeah, we're working with the DCC on. We just started rolling these out in some other states, and we're working with the DCC on what that may look like in California. Some of the smaller states that Metrc operates in, you know, one of these events covers the entire state, which obviously will not work for California. So, you know, there's some logistics and planning that need to happen, and we're doing that in collaboration with the DCC. But I'm very hopeful that we will be able to hold some user exchanges for California licensees in various regions in California next calendar year, 2024.
Looking forward to it, and goes without saying, but please keep us in the loop as those come in, because we want to keep our membership in the loop and have them in there. Pam, any other burning questions on your end as we're starting to wrap up?
I was actually just going to invite Michael and the team to provide any last sort of comments that they have, and all of these different resources that you've mentioned throughout the webinar. I'd love to capture so that we can send it out in a follow-up to our membership, make sure everybody has access to them, and ways to directly communicate with Metrc. But with the last few minutes, I'm going to turn the floor over to Michael and the Metrc team to let us know anything that we didn't ask and that they want to impart to us, and also to say a heartfelt thank you for taking the opportunity and working through some of the challenges with us.
Thank you for allowing us the opportunity. I know we have a little bit of time, but do you want to, some of these other questions that are open, happy to just go through them, or like what?
Oh, sure thing. Yeah.
Yeah. You want to go through them and what you can't do, we can get some written responses to. That would be awesome.
Yeah. Okay. First one that I see is, when's Metrc's contract up for renewal with the state of California? It's June 2024. So in 8 months, 9 months. where retailer hours stickering just working. Yeah, so this question, the next question refers to POS and interface with Metrc, where Metrc create a unique barcode for products that will save retailers hundreds of hours per year. And when do we plan to roll out ChromaSignet? So let me clarify a couple of things. So there's a business called ChromaSignet, which creates QR codes, and really, I think is super helpful. There's a number of businesses that do this in the cannabis space, so there's nothing particularly I think like nothing that I would tell you that's like earth shattering relative to what other folks have been working towards. But what we were required to do for a completely different state is to create a QR code that makes a standardized sort of products catalog for this particular state. And they wanted it such that the state system would produce, if somebody scanned an individual retail item, the QR code would produce the name of that item, picture of that item, that protects public health to make sure that you're, like, if you think you're buying a green jar, you're not holding a purple bag. It has direct connectivity via Metrc to the COA, so you can see the actual testing of that product. Also has ingredients, other features and functionality allow to facilitate recalls. So if you bought something a couple weeks ago and then you heard there's a recall and you're like, oh, would I buy get recalled? You can scan it and see that there's a recall there. It also allows for a lot of times folks, when they have an adverse reaction or a bad experience, they don't know who to call. So it can allow functionality for folks to be able to actually like click on that and report an adverse reaction. That's the public health side. The benefit as it relates to helping find meaning and value on the regulatory side and kind of also hopefully streamline the process is on the licensee side. And that's, I think, where this question points to. So for folks that don't know, you probably all know, secondary stickering or secondary labeling is a very time-consuming process. It happens in a lot of states, not just California, but you're required to put on, like, you might intake an item into your dispensary and have to print out a separate label so that it can scan into trees, and a separate label that has the package ID, and a separate label for something else. And it depends on where you're at. And some parts of California, you actually have to have the physical COA on hand, or you have to print it out. These are very time-consuming things, which we recognize. And so being able to solve this via QR code, being able to leverage some of the functionality we were able to acquire in terms of kind of rolling in the ChromaSignet folks into Metrc, we're able to produce something that's currently being tested in some places of California currently with some brands and dispensaries. It's also being tested for full integration into Trees and Blaze and Dutchie soon, and we'll be expanding that more for folks such that you don't have to put a sticker on something every time you want to scan it into your point of sale. There's actually, it completely streamlines the process. And based on our early time study assessments, we think it's approximately 1 to 2 minutes per individual retail item. California had hundreds of millions of retail items last year, so those numbers add up quite a bit. So we're working with the DCC on it. This should not be, while it's different and people like, that's change, that could be a little bit scary. The reason why we're piloting it and testing it is to make sure that it is a truly exceptional user experience for you, and allows for your businesses to be able to run more efficiently, be able to find significant cost savings, and most importantly, be able to support consumer confidence.
And I know we've got a few minutes, and not sure how long attendees can stay on, but we're booked. We've got the Zoom booked till 11:45, so we have a few minutes if folks want to hang out. I'm actually going to jump to Whitney's question because it's related to this. Michael, Whitney's follow-up question, if you see it in the chat here, around it. I'll read it out. At the beginning of the year, an idea was presented to make retail package management easier by enabling users to identify a sub batch and basically have that child package follow through. At the time, this feature was available in Metrc, and you could click on a batch in retail, and the production batch would be visible and compared against a variable data sticker. Shortly after the ChromaSignet purchase, it's no longer an available feature. Is this part of maybe the change that you're talking about, or this seems related to the ChromaSignet piece you were talking about, so I figure we'll bring this question in.
It's not. Chris, Sam,
oh, okay.
I don't actually know what happened here.
I'd have to look into the specifics on that. Some of the things that appear or go away in the system are as a result of working with DCC. Some are performance considerations for the overall system. But in this particular case, I'd have to go and look at the specifics, but I can do that and get back to you.
Great, and I'll connect you with Whitney via email. I can get you her contact information.
I don't know.
And as we're talking, oh, sorry, go ahead, Michael.
Just the next one is the central tenet of Metrc to state require users to gain Salesforce accounts at a cost of 25 per month. No, we don't require anybody to get a Salesforce. We don't charge. I mean, technically, you do have an account within Salesforce if you're like a user within the Metrc instance of Salesforce for Service Cloud. That's Salesforce is a system that has many modules under it, and that's where our support system lies. But we don't require anyone to pay for that at all. So I don't know where that would come from.
When we mentioned, so when people sign up via that Salesforce, that's a free service. They can just sign up.
Yeah, that's just access to our portal. That's really all it is. I mean, you're not getting access to all of Salesforce. You're getting access to the support portal.
And Chris, you just mentioned in our sub chat you're going to be answering some of these via text. So, I guess I'll ask Angelica's as well as something I saw come in a private chat. Is there a timeline? And if you mentioned this earlier, Michael, sorry if we mentioned, is there a timeline for when that Chroma Signet integration will be rolled out in California?
So Chroma Signet kind of its own thing, right? So there's a lot of things that are in Chroma Signet that are not like, there's a lot of like loyalty functionality. We're going to enable folks to create this functionality to be open such that third-party integrators can create kind of add-on solutions for this. And I would kind of put Chroma in that category. We do employ the people of Chroma Signet. They have expertise in this. So building out what we refer to as Metrc Retail ID is what's happening now, and that's currently being tested. I mean, I can't tell you if the state is going to, I think there's certain interpretations at the very least the state would have to embrace if they wanted to make this kind of a full scale thing. And we certainly had conversations about what they would want and what they need to get to where they want to get to, but I can't speculate on the timing on any regulatory changes that would be necessary. I can tell you we're currently testing it. We'll continue to test it. We're going to expand testing of it to make sure that we're in the best possible position whenever the time comes that we can release it California-wide.
Roger that. Hey, a question that I can actually answer. Claire, will the recording of the Q&A and the conversation be available? Yes, we will be posting this on the CCIA YouTube and then just disseminating it through our LinkedIn, Instagram, email, newsletters, all the good things. So stay tuned for that. We'll have a recording to you just a few days after. We have looks like 2 questions left, and you know what, if we get those and we've answered either all via text or via live. Along the lines of training, as you're contemplating improved training, can we get improved? This is from Megan Newton. Can we please update training for testing labs? Looks like when they took the intro training, there was the only info for testing labs was one slide mentioning to refer to the instruction guide. So as you're considering the training pipeline, we have more bespoke training for the testing sector.
Yeah, we are. Testing's really, it's not like a lot of licensees, but it's very specific. And so we have a really strong training expert, and we tend to fly her all over creation. In fact, I thought we're sort of move away from that, but that is not the case. So testing questions are a big deal. And so making sure that you're prepared, please feel free to reach out to me directly, depending on what you're trying to solve for. I can connect you with Myra Chin, who is the person that does most of our training for testing at this point in time, or with our testing experts that are really our subject matter experts, they live in the support function. But the testing curriculum, so to speak, is definitely going to be much more cumbersome than I would describe other parts of the system, because if you look at a lot of the states that you might be similar to another state, but testing tends to be wildly different. And so there's so many different testing types and so many different scenarios where a test in one state has a result that fails, but in another state that would actually pass. And so it is definitely a little more complicated. We certainly recognize that that we're short in terms of providing the right level of education. So to solve your problem, hopefully your immediate problems, please reach out to me directly.
Wonderful. Friends, we've put Oh, Chris, were you? I'm sorry, I saw a type going in that, so I wasn't sure if we should.
I think I can address that quickly,
Absolutely.
and I'm happy to have a follow-up conversation with this person if they would like. And I definitely appreciate the sentiment behind the request. The problem with that is that Metrc is not what's called the system of record for your license certificate or your licensing data. All of that lives in a different DCC system, the Acela platform, which some of you may be familiar with from actually applying for the license and accepting your license. So there's a lot of different scenarios where that type of information, where your licensing data, the system of record for that is Acela. It can get out of sync for documents like that might be uploaded into Metrc. There's a lot of risk there for confusion and for data just not being in sync. And so for that reason, we take on a very minimal amount of your licensing information, only enough to allow Metrc to function properly from a track and trace perspective.
Thanks, Chris. And all I can say, I think for many of our members all too familiar with Acela, would be nice to have a conversation with them in a similar regard. We'll leave that there. Y'all, and Pam, I think Amber's final quote unquote question, the last thing we have in the box, is a perfect close to this. Yeah. A quick note of appreciation for the new direction that we seem to be going in. Y'all, clearly there's a lot we're still working through, a lot of burning issues, a lot of things that, we look forward to collaborating on and smoothing over. But appreciate the time that y'all took to speak with our members. Any closing thoughts from anybody here in the group?
There's one that I think we just put in dismiss for reason maybe it's not relevant, but so this is a really common misconception. Metrc does not stand for Marijuana Enforcement Tracking Reporting Compliance. When you see Metrc all capitalized, you're referring to so in California, the track and trace system is called CCTT, California Cannabis Track and Trace, right? That's what they say. This is the California Cannabis Track and Trace program. The vendor that facilitates that program is Metrc. However, because Colorado was the first and folks were modeling it, it was actually called, what was originally called MITS. This predates me, but I just always ask why it's capitalized if that's not our name. It was called MITS, which is like Medical Marijuana Information Tracking System. Then it was called MITS when they went adult use, MITS. Then it was replaced with Metrc, which was Marijuana Enforcement Tracking. I don't remember the other one is in compliance, tracking regulation compliance or something like that. Metrc, the system that is now known as Metrc, was Franwell's track and trace system, which was the former parent company of Metrc, and it just people just kept saying, "Well, I have to put it in Metrc. I put it in Metrc," and that's what you saw as like when you logged into business. So because Metrc became known as that, then Metrc, the legal entity, was created in 2018, whereas Metrc initially started in 2011 in the state of Colorado. So it doesn't. I understand your confusion if I'm saying like, hey, it's supposed to be compliance, or I'm saying it's not, and you're saying, well, it's actually in your name. I totally understand that. And if you look at Wikipedia and like anything else, it still says that's what it stands for. It doesn't. We don't capitalize it anymore.
Michael, I appreciate that clarification. As a lawyer, words matter, right? Definitions matter. It then gives a false sense of what the operator should expect. So I really appreciate you taking the time to readdress that so that we can reframe what it is that our expectations are. So that was a really important endpoint. And I think to the last Q&A chat, thank you for putting this together. Thank you for sharing your time with us. And we really look forward to making this an iterative experience so that we can continue the dialogue and have continuous improvement. That's all we can ask for. And this was an amazing first exchange.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks everybody. CCIA members, stay tuned for the archive footage. We'll also, and Chris, if you don't mind, because you put it in the chat, I'll be sure to attach your email to that as well when we send that out to folks. Hit up Chris, hit me up, friends, if you need any facilitating or further conversation. Otherwise, thanks, folks. Have a great day. And anybody who's heading up, see you at Meadowlands. Peace, y'all.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.